Your frames per second is the second most important thing when you're doing anything in Minecraft. The first is your still, and unfortunately, I can't help you with that. What I can help you with is your FPS though. Getting lower FPS means everything feels terrible to play. You can feel input lag, and sometimes you have really good FPS, but you get horrible lag spikes that completely throw you off. To find out what the best client is, I tested a bunch of different ways to play across my expensive gaming computer and my parents' less expensive work computer to give the proper full image of just what the best is for both ends of the money spectrum. I tested Badlion client and Lunar client, a few different installations of Forge, Optifine, Fabric 1.16, and then Vanilla to get a baseline to compare with. To test the clients, I did 3 basic tests. The first test was playing Skywars 3 times on the same map and getting the average results. The second was AFKing for exactly 1 minute in a full Skyblock hub of 80 players. And the third was completing a full run of Floor 7 dungeon in Hypixel Skyblock. If you want more details on exactly what I did and why I did it, I'll put that in the description, because I don't really want to bore you with all that. So without further ado, let's get into some numbers. The first set of numbers is from my own personal computer, and for me, my average FPS isn't really a problem in Skywars test because I know it's always going to be high enough for my 240Hz monitor. Having too high of an FPS count can actually be a negative thing, as you can experience screen tearing, which looks pretty bad and distracting. So it's a good practice to go into your settings and limit your FPS to your monitor's refresh rate. If you don't know what your monitor's refresh rate is, it's then probably 60 Hz. Therefore, what I'm actually more interested in these numbers are the lows, which represent the lag spikes you experience. When the 1% low number is closer to the average, it means you experience less lag spikes, and the 0.1% low usually indicates how bad the lag spikes are. So with that information out of the way, we can finally get to the rest of the numbers. So for me in Skywars, I actually got the best FPS overall using 1.16.5's Fabric launcher with some optimization mods. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's the best, because PvPing on 1.16.5 is a pretty terrible experience, without a block hitting and with slight hit delay. Instead, it was actually Vanilla 1.8.9 and 1.8.9 Optifine that ended up being the best. However, I would consider basically every single one of these perfectly fine, and it comes down to personal choice. Except 1.16 Vanilla, which had horrendous lag spikes, and my Skyblock mods, which I only really tested for the sake of being too lazy to swap clients when I want to PvP. Skyblock's dungeon is the ultimate stress test of a client though, especially the bridge between Phase 1 and Phase 2, which can cripple even the best PCs due to the huge amount of enemies, particles, and 5 players to render all at once. Interesting to note is that I actually used a 1.16 Skyblock mod with Fabric, and due to its low, I would probably consider this the winner in this category. 1.16.5 is perfectly playable on Skyblock. Optifine 1.16.5 Vanilla and especially Badlion were absolutely crippled. My Skyblock mod folder performed the worst as expected, but it's still playable, and the greater selection of Skyblock mods makes it a worthwhile trade-off for me. The Skyblock hub was my final test, and surprisingly, everything performed the worst here, highlighting Vanilla's inability to load a lot of players without a huge lag spikes. There's no hugely significant differences between most clients here, although I do find it funny that Badlion choked harder than my mods folder. Somehow. When you have a pretty good PC, anything works really well. Who would have thought? I can't really call a clear winner here, and it's ultimately about how much performance you are willing to trade off in return for more features and mods. The only loser I can draw here is Badlion, which likely lost because of its updated Skyblock add-ons mod, which has a heavy performance penalty. But my mods folder also has this updated mod and performed basically equal or even better than Badlion. Yikes. Now, the real fight over FPS starts on the lesser end PC. This PC has a Ryzen 5 2400G, meaning it's running on integrated graphics, which a lot of my viewers can probably relate to. Here, the average FPS becomes a lot more important. Although my monitor's refresh rate is 60 Hz, I actually want to aim to cap my FPS at 120 FPS because I won't experience screen tearing with a multiple of my refresh rate, and around 90 FPS is the point where the human eye will not notice any input lag, because even though you can only see 60 of the 120 frames per second, your computer will register a mouse click or keyboard press twice as fast every second. If your monitor is below 90 Hz, try and aim for an FPS twice that of your monitor's refresh rate. Okay, so Skywars paints a pretty similar picture. Basically, anything is going to be quite good to use, and it comes down to personal preference. Unlike the other tests, I added a new test which is using Patcher without 5Z, just to see what kind of difference it made. All this really tells me is that anything is better than vanilla, so if you are on a bad PC, you should go with anything that isn't vanilla. The Dungeons test shows us how absolutely terrible Minecraft really runs with all of its lows, which are probably from Necron's boss fight. Fabric comes out as the obvious winner in this category, given that even at its lowest point, it still ran a lot smoother than any other offering, and you get the added bonus of the Skyblocker mod, which I did use during this test. The one thing I have to note here is that when I played with Lunar, I experienced lag spikes almost every minute that brought my FPS down to 1, which ended up killing me twice. This only happens in dungeons, and it may just be something to do with my PC and not an issue with Lunar. Finally, everything performed relatively the same in the Skyblock hub test. It's not an area of the game where you are ever going to get a good frame rate, but it's also an area you aren't going to spend a long time in it, so it doesn't matter much. My only surprise is how poorly Fabric performs here. Overall, what can we take from this? Patcher and Optifine tends to top the charts on the low-end PC, although every client runs about the same, and I tend to draw a clear winner here because at the end of the day, it is mostly down to personal preference. What I can say is that vanilla is not going to give you a particularly good experience in features or in performance, and you should try using something else. If you're a Skyblock player and you struggle with Skyblock things, give Fabric with Skyblocker, Sodium, and Phosphor a try. It runs really smooth. And ultimately, if you choose to use Forge, make sure you have Patcher and Optifine alongside any mods you use to give you a huge performance boost over vanilla. Hopefully that was helpful to someone out there, or maybe you're annoyed that there's no clear winners and you're still stuck on what to pick. My personal recommendation to you is Lunar or Forge for PvP, and Forge or Fabric for Skyblock, and if you want to get started with a Forge mod guide, check out the video on screen now. Alright, that's about everything for today, I think. Alright, see ya, have a nice day.